One of my questions is about GPU rendering, and I wonder if any of your solutions are incorporating stuff that Otoy is doing, or GPU instances. Is Google planning on throwing in graphics cards to machines, and where are you guys headed there?
Okay, this is actually one of the most asked features of rendering. What I can say is this is something that we're definitely looking at. Currently, most of the rendering, at least for visual effects, is still CPU based, and we're able to offer this for burst rendering. With GPU is something that's definitely on our minds.
With regard to deadline, absolutely, we're supporting GPU. It's supported on a sort of per renderer or per application basis within our plugin system. But if the application supports GPUs, we can implement it within our plugin. We already have some, for example, V-Ray and so forth. And so you can allocate how many GPUs and where they go and so forth. So yes, it is there.
We would love to see GPUs as well.
I would say we're actively keeping tabs on where the VFX market is in terms of rendering, and right now we're looking at V-Ray, Mental Ray, Arnold, RenderMan primarily being CPU based, but certainly as that progresses in the future, as Bell said, we're looking at everything at Google.
Thanks for the presentation. For on-demand licensing, for example, if we use a solution like Thinkbox, the on-demand licensing for plugins and V-Ray and Maya. I know Zinc has it, but does it, like, for example, like for a solution like Thinkbox exist?
Sure. So obviously the Thinkbox model is sort of roll your own, and we try to make it as easy as possible to roll your own. Clearly, the vendors have to be on board with on-demand licensing. We're providing our own system that anyone can jump onto if they want to, so that makes it easier for them. Some will and some won't. But I think it's undeniable based on what we've all seen today that if you're not playing nice with the cloud, you're not going to be all that successful. So a lot of vendors already have solutions that make on-demand licensing work on the cloud, and the ones that don't, I'd be very surprised if they don't get on board very soon.
Question for me on and this is just a general statement. If any of you guys have experiences with this, because we're trying to go through it as well, have you had to deal with any of the studios and the security requirements for putting these images up and down, and any kind of what have they had you go through, for qualifications and anything else? Just because this is such a new platform, and there's really not any kind of standards or any kind of letters written on how to do this yet. So I didn't know if you guys had any real world experience with the studios putting their images into the cloud and not being secure in the facility.
Yeah, I mean, one, there's going to be a completely different session on security just after launch. But the point is absolutely valid. Every studio considers these assets as like prize jewels. Their business depends on it. But it's also important to know that for cloud, this is our business, right? And we need to make sure that our customers find that their content is safe on the cloud, and we make all the efforts that we can to keep it that way. At the same time, the industry, I'm sure most of you will agree, is quite fragmented in terms of what are those security best practices that should be. Each studio has its own view, and we're waiting for the NPA guidelines to be published so that we can demonstrate that we not only comply but exceed the requirements of security best practices. What I can, however, say is that for all the work that the on-prem security engineers do, the cloud as an industry, because we depend so much on that business, puts several orders more in terms of investments in security. So that's what I can say. But I'd love to hear from what studios like RodeoFX have actually faced when they use cloud for the really stunning visual effects.
I mean, whenever we use the cloud, we have to get in touch with the studio right away and get permission. And surprise, surprise, almost all of them say no. So yeah, so right now our cloud usage is typically focused on kind of commercial products or independent films where the restrictions become significantly less.
So we're taking a sort of a two-pronged approach. One is reactive and one is proactive. On the reactive side, we do work with a number of studios out there that have blessed us to do certain work for them. There are some ways that we can not store data in the cloud, but maybe store it on site and simply process frames and then send them right back. On the proactive side, we're working with the Cloud Security Alliance and the MPAA to understand what the guidelines should be and what the best practices should be for security. Yes, I do.
Yeah, we're hoping that the bar would increase because traditionally MPA probably was tasked with the standards for physical security of existing studios.
Both the MPA and a number of the studios don't have a single position. It's evolving. Get what you're bringing for. That has to figure into your negotiations. No, I'm good.
So I think there's kind of two different pieces, though, when you're talking about security. One is the cloud itself secure? I think it's unquestionable that it is secure because banks are running on it, military is running on it, movies are being distributed over the cloud. The cloud is secure as a service. But then there's the question of how do you interface it? How do you get from your local premise up to the cloud and the sort of entry points, endpoint attacks, and so forth like that? That really falls back to just traditional IT security that's fairly well understood. Now, there's of course a few new pieces in there, but security, of course, is one of our highest concerns. But I don't think it's as big of an enigma as people make it out to be. Personally.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I don't think that the studios or the MPA, for that matter, are based on rationality. They're an entirely reactive model. Something gets out in the wild, they start blaming people as quickly as they can find them. The cloud is usually on them.
And what you've just said describes the internet in general, right? I mean, we went through all this with the internet. We went out through all of it with VHS tapes. We went through all of it with any sort of new distribution mechanism that's ever been invented goes through the same educational learning pain process, and we're just now coming to it with the studios, and we'll get through it. We're all smart people.
Yes. We can give you one. Oh, this works. It's you.
Okay, now. Okay, my name is Jack. I work with Uncharted Territory, and the gentleman over there, I worked actually with him before. Security is dictated to us by the studios. And specifically, I can tell you when I worked at that company before, Marvel dictated to us what we can do, what we cannot do. And I can assure you, they did not like the cloud. In fact, they even dictate us not to have internet access to the artist workstations. So security is very important. I work right now on a FUG feature movie. I know for sure cloud is a no. I would like to hear from you guys. One thing is, have you worked with them on getting the green light that we can use the cloud? Secondly, who's taking the liability in case such as, for example, Expendables 3 was leaked last year in August, full DVD quality 3 weeks before the release? Is Google taking the liability for that along if something like that happens? Or is it going to be us, the studios who's working on the content? Or is it the studios themselves?
Actually, I'm seeing a very smart security engineer, Matt O'Connor, coming over. Matt, thank you very much. Okay, you could have come in just in time. Before I hand over the mic to Matt, we are trying to rationalize with all the studios, including Marvel, to look at cloud holistically rather than having a yes or a no binary decision, right? And regarding Expendables liability, frankly, I do not know if any of that has actually happened. Okay, cool. Thank you, Matt. Savior.
Working? Oh, there we go. Okay, there's a little bit of delay. In case I say a curse word, they can beat me, I guess. My name is Matthew O'Connor, and I'm responsible for security and compliance products for Google's cloud platform. And I do actually have a prepared presentation to give you guys after lunch and put you to sleep after you've eaten. But very quickly, and we can talk about this more, and I'm around all afternoon, so I can get into details with people that want. Yes, Marvel has a lot of constraints on what they want to do. We've talked to Marvel, we've talked to other studios. It's not really clear across the motion picture industry what a baseline standard is. And I'll show you a little bit later when I give my presentation that we address a lot of security standards and some industry-specific stuff that has nothing to do with motion pictures but might be applicable. We have actually, I was at a security or a content protection summit before the holidays, and I actually made an offer there in the room, and this offer still stands, that Google is willing to help facilitate the conversation with the motion picture industry to figure out what that baseline standard is, and we'd actually be willing to do it in a way where we could also bring the competitors to the table, because we don't believe that we're the only solution that people are going to use, but we do believe that cloud-based computing has the ability to help your industry do some revolutionary things, do new things, do things cheaper, do things faster than you've been able to do it. And I think that I think there's some content that you guys are going to be able to create that's going to blow our minds, but you're going to be able to do it because of the on-demand nature of cloud resources. So we've made that offer. That offer still stands. And then specifics in terms of liability and like indemnification, we have commercial arrangements with our customers. And so, obviously if there is, a major motion picture being done and there's some concerns about that, I think Google, in terms of being a commercial service provider, we have to address those kinds of things in our commercial arrangements with our customers. And so we have some provisions in our agreements with customers that take care of those kinds of things. Because we have banks, we have companies that have intellectual property around, industrial mechanical design. We have customers who are delivering consumer services, and the privacy of that consumer information is really, really important to them. And so, we protect a broad spectrum of customers, both through our security measures, security policies, but also through our commercial arrangements with customers. And so, that's something we get lawyers. We sit down and we hash that out and get it worked out, and we can do it in a way that it'll be amenable to all the parties involved.
Thank you very much, Matt. Sure. And I do look forward to your presentation, Daphne.
So I have a few concerns and some questions. The first concerns are generally for the studios in terms of gauging the amount of waste in terms of compute time. It's not too often that artists will send jobs to the farm, and not because of anything that they did, but because maybe the software that they're using may fail on the farm. Have you guys done some analysis of some of those compute cycles that may not have needed, that burn through hours and dollars, of course, in terms of associating how they, with licensed software, part of the reason why we roll our own cloud a lot of times is because, again, it keeps that liability a lot lower. And then the second question is really about alternatives to Avir and whatnot, things like Aspera and Google's take on things like that.
Maybe Hunter or Jordan wants to take this cost and savings.
Sure.
I think there's some inherent responsibility to the user if you're using software and you submit a job and there's a bug in the host software. So that is something that's come up a few times within our system. We're certainly happy to work with customers if it's a bug on the infrastructure side. It's a little bit less clear, and it hasn't come up that much in terms of...
It's definitely the studio's liability cost.
Right, absolutely, and that's inherently part of the risk you're associated with cloud at this point. But to be honest with you, at least in the Zinc infrastructure standpoint, we haven't seen that being a major blocker, and it's probably the same with Conductor in terms of the churn of hours and the relatively few errors that you actually see on shots. And granted, if an artist doesn't prepare the shot properly and the sampling is super high, there's some responsibility on them. But in terms of the software side, I haven't seen that high of a failure rate where it cuts into the actual spend. But I would imagine it's the same.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we do to manage that. The first is that we do health checks on all the instances. So we stream the log files off of them that we can detect anomalies in. The other is that we are constantly going around and checking these instances. So if their memory spikes or we see a panic and the instance dies, you would still be getting charged for persistent disk and some of the other things that are going on there. But we're going around every 20 seconds and checking to see where everything is and if it's all working. And we also have, as I talked about in my presentation, we have some breadcrumbs in our code all around so that when any sort of an action is taken, it writes something out to BigQuery, an item out there, so that we can track any job that comes on and to make sure that it comes off. And while it's running, we can track to see if anything has happened to it. So when it comes to runaway costs, we try to mitigate that as much as we can by just constantly looking back and seeing if things are still running correctly, and constantly just health checking all the instances across the whole farm.
And just one other thing, I don't envision it that differently if you have an artist that submits a job locally and you are paying something for your HVAC and for your power of that machine, and if it's a wasted render, that's still a sunk cost to you. So I don't envision it that much differently.
Yeah, and regarding your second question about Aspera and we are under no illusion that all of visual effects rendering will actually happen on cloud from day one. People have existing data centers and will probably use cloud for bursting. So to that effect, I think our partnership that we just recently announced with Javier is actually very, very important. People probably already have their existing compliances, and Javier just recently came up with the virtual filer that runs on GCP. Similarly, Aspera, though it's not like bundled with the offering, does support moving of files from your desktops or from your local data centers to Google Cloud Platform. And those integration points are what we enable.
Hi, this is for Jordan. Could you elaborate more on your salt stack setup and talk about maybe the time to boot to when the system's actually ready to render?
Not really. I don't have I don't have those stats. I forget what we had done instant time setup prior to that with VMs, and the time it would take to boot was just not great in comparison to what Google claims the instances can start with. As soon as we started using Salt, everything started getting closer to the Google times that we had seen before. But I'd be happy to put you in touch with somebody at Rodeo if you have any interest in that.
Cool, thank you.
Just like a basic logistical question, do we have any real world examples from any of you guys or anyone else here of moving data back and forth to the cloud? For us, that's our biggest concern, being able to ingest the data quickly, especially like a company like I work for now. We're working on a lot of smaller projects. So instead of working on one film for a year or 2 years, we'll work on a couple hundred smaller projects. So that moving data back and forth, it's sometimes terabytes per day. We don't have the pipe to do that. Security and speed don't get along. So I'm curious just if anyone has any real world examples dealing with that.
Generally speaking, it always comes back to how much bandwidth you have. If you have large bandwidth, you have a little bit more flexibility. You always want to be intelligent with choosing which files to push up and push down. Compositing is often challenging unless the data is already up there, of course, simply because you have to move your plates up and so forth. In a lot of cases, if you're looking at simulations, are a great example where you have a fairly small set of data that you're uploading. You may be generating a cache, or your download might be kind of heavy, but generally speaking, a lot of facilities have an easier time getting data down than they do pushing data up. So you can push up data sets that are small, do your compute, pull the data set down, or alternatively, leave it up there for the next stage. So it is doable. It's like so many other things in computing, you just have to be aware of the constraints and send the right work, use the right tool for the job, essentially.
Both for online use case as well as offline ingestion. Ingestion is by far the biggest problem. for cloud computing because processing will happen only if the content is there. So for the online, the real strength is the Google Massive Network and our points of presence and the recently announced carrier interconnect. So irrespective of which telecom operator that you work with, we will be able to peer and will be able to offer the interconnect with your provider. And we just started a beta for offline ingestion right here in LA with a partner called Iron Mountain. So if you actually have disks of content and you need to upload it, you don't need to do it from your premises. You can actually ship it or carry it to our facilities and partners.
I do want to add, I think the perception is worse than the reality oftentimes with CG rendering. I mean, at the beginning of a project is when your textures and your large assets are coming. So if you manage your pipeline well, and Zinc does it, and I'm sure Conductor does it, you're able to parse a scene for only the assets you need. So as long as you're able to move that stuff up, generally in the day or 2 or 3 that you're animating or you're modeling, you're doing your geometry, like those large assets are not changing. And I know it's sort of a foreign concept. Yes, I have to move these massive data sets up, but we found when we have had hundreds of customers prior to joining Google App when we were on Amazon, and we have many customers now in the beta. And data I/O, I think, is perceived initially as a major blocker, but once you're actually up and in the pipeline and using it, it's not as bad. And I would imagine it's the same for you guys. Put a whole feature film through. I would imagine it's the same.
Yeah, we call them incremental uploads. Anything that changes gets uploaded when we do the dependency checks. Anything that's been uploaded already, we just skip. And then to confirm that it's going to work, we pre-render the first, the middle, and the last frame just to make sure that all the items are there.
I think that the offline idea is really good for smaller companies and for studios around Los Angeles that are getting their feet wet, where we're still having to ingest terabytes per day. The ability to send a runner over with hard drives is the reality of how we're going to have to work.
Hello? Okay. I work with a company that helps companies build on-prem solutions, so I'm privy to a lot of the constraints that these guys deal with. And there are a lot of questions I have, but the one question I've got is we're always trying to figure out that inflection point of maximizing CPU utilization, and we run into a lot of bottlenecks, whether it's the network or the storage. So one thing I was wondering is if there's any telemetry in the VMs that you guys are running in the cloud that'll tell you if the CPUs are running at 100%, and if there's any way to look at what the storage protocols that are being used are to make sure there's not a bottleneck somewhere else. It's one thing to have a VM that's running, that's processing, but to know if it's being managed efficiently, if the storage on the back end is optimized to handle that type of flow. Is there anything that you guys can talk about that?
So I'll speak briefly about deadline. Generally speaking, a VM is going to behave the same way that a physical machine does. So whatever utilization you see on a physical machine is going to mirror on a VM. Additionally, in the case of deadline, we have metrics that we gather from the machine so that you can graph out the CPU utilization over the course of the job. So it's there, you can see it, and then make your determinations based on that. And then, of course, deadline load balances the number of VMs based on the load in the queue, so that you get the same sort of efficiency you do with these with a lot of the solutions that you're seeing here, where you're only amping up the number of cores that you really need to do the work.
And I'd like to mention the recent Stack Driver product, which is integrated with the Google Cloud Platform, where you can monitor not just the Google instances, but across any of your public cloud offering. If you are basically using multiple clouds.
What is the back-end storage protocol that Director is using, for example? And where's the data stored, and how is it communicating with the VMs?
So it lives in mostly a Gluster system with PD behind it. We use Google's I/O scales with how big the PD is. So we get to the right size to get the max I/O out of it, and then we mount volume after volume and Gluster instance after Gluster instance.
So the back end scales as the front end is scaling too?
Yes.
If I can make a suggestion regarding I/O, maybe the Google Cloud Platform guys could interface with the Google Fiber guys and get an LA deployment pushed out here. It'd be pretty nice. Thanks.
Thank you. Take it.
I agree with the Google Fiber. We need that in San Diego too. It's terrible in there. So about other softwares and plugins, et cetera, I didn't understand exactly how the deployment works. For example, like my setup is Max, Fusion, V-Ray, and a bunch of plugins. So when you create the virtual machine, the first time you install those softwares, and then stays there, that virtual machine available for you forever. How does it work? How do you deploy updates, et cetera, et cetera? How do you work? In the case of Zinc, I see that if they work with Maya and Nuke, that there's a possibility to work with other softwares too, or is that's the limitation?
I mean, on the Zinc side, it's built as a turnkey solution, so we're looking to add other host applications in the future. But essentially, now when you submit a job from an application, we'll parse the scene, make sure we have the proper version of the software, of the renderer, of the plugins installed, and have an image ready for you, a pre-configured image for you based on that. I would imagine it's the same with Conductor as well. So on the software as a service side, that's how we have these images ready for you, analyze your scene, and bake out one for you.
So would it work at Max and Fusion?
Well, currently, we don't support Max or Fusion, but again, we're looking at all content creation applications in the future.
Thanks.
And so in the case of Deadline, you essentially create your own OS image, right? So exactly what you said, you pull up an instance of the operating system that's provided by Google, install whatever you want on it. Essentially, you install your same pipeline that you would in your facility, and then you save that out as an image. And then when it's spawning virtual machines, it's just making copies of that image for each virtual machine. And so you can pretty much build exactly what pipeline you want. Of course, you have to be a little bit intelligent about your bandwidth. If you don't want to do anything too heavy based on your bandwidth between your local and your cloud. But in a lot of cases, the solution to that is just push whatever database or whatever it is you think you're talking to, or whatever piece is slow, up into the cloud so that it can scale with the rest of the stuff.
Oh, hey. Thanks everyone. All of these were very interesting questions. And I personally enjoyed all these presentations. So I really want to thank Todd, Hunter, James, and Jordan. If you looked at the agenda closely, the first half of our day was primarily focused on rendering. And the second half, we're trying to mix it up with storage, a presentation on security, and some of the interesting new solutions around Amir, and the last session around content distribution and streaming. Hope you'll all join us again after lunch, and we'll be back in this room at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.